Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Raab. I'm the president of SNY, but today I'm the moderator for today's panel, Sports Ownership. To my left is David Blitzer, the global head of TAC Ops at Blackstone. To his left is Michele Kang, the majority owner of the Washington Spirit. And to Michelle's left is Angie Long, the co-founder and owner of the Kansas City Current. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Let's jump right in. David, you've made a host of team investments since 2011. Guiding hypotheses behind these investments and your expectations from a business perspective?
Fun and championships. And I've definitely gotten the first part right and definitely not gotten the second part right. But if you want to talk about it from an investment standpoint, I always chuckle. The very first time I spoke at something like this was pretty soon after we made the investment in the Philadelphia 76ers. So that's going back about 11 years. And somebody asked me, would this pass the Blackstone Investment Committee? And, I sort of really thought about that a little bit. And the answer was like a very clear no, because it didn't have free cash flow. And this idea that these would be worth more in the future while you're carrying, at least in that particular situation, a lot of losses for quite a long time, wasn't something that was going to, go and sort of pass our investment committee. But it's interesting because it really made me think about that question of where I know we'll hit later on in this session a little bit, this institutional question. And at what point in time and what caused that crossover into institutional capital really starting to come into sports? But to go back to your actual question, for me, it was two things at the heart of it. And they both turned out to be stronger forces than I thought, even though my two theories from an investment standpoint, again, put aside the fan side of the equation, the community side of the equation, those are highly relevant that we can talk about. But on the pure investment, for me, it was basically realizing that these are the leagues and the teams are they're amazing content creators. So I had a pretty strong view that the media rights values in that particular situation in the NBA were going to grow quite dramatically. And similarly with other things that I've been involved with and the things that I'm not involved with, we all know that content is extremely valuable. We all know that live sports content is the most valuable of all content. And so forget, again, exactly how we consume that content for a second. The value of the content and the fact that these are media businesses are going to continue to drive value, and certainly that was my view at the time. The second, and even maybe in some ways more powerful than, again, what I would have thought, is just basic laws of supply and demand. And so you have a supply situation where there's very, very new franchises being created, and the demand for them is growing, quite dramatically. And you can just see that play out and how many people show up at different situations to try and get involved in a process in the potential investment or acquisition of a sports team. So for me, supply and demand and content / media rights.
So Michele and Angie, both of you have made recent but really bold investments in the NWSL. And we heard David sort of over an 11-year time horizon, right, talk about how he's thought about it from a thesis standpoint. How do you look at your investments? Is it specific to the NWSL? Is it specific to women's soccer? Is it the same? You're just coming in 2021, 22. What's behind your investments?
Thank you. So I guess I would maybe turn the question around for a second and say, what makes it so bold? Because when you look at it from a price tag perspective, when you look at it from an upside potential, I think we are in it's obviously a significant amount of money, but it's significantly less than what most people pay for sports franchises with, I think, a very similar, if not higher upside, huge tailwinds, and something that we've never really promoted for half of our population. So it actually seems less risky in a lot of ways to me.
So just to clarify, when I say bold, to me actually it's credit. It's the practice facility, it's the stadium, it's bringing a team back to Kansas City. I think that's terrific, and I think that's really bold.
Thank you. And again, when we think about the investment that we're making, because Kansas City's making huge investments in facilities, in the training facility that we've built, in the stadium that we are building. But again, these to me are kind of basic prerequisites to having a proper sports team, and to really being able to, in a stadium, capture your market, your fans, your city, and for your team, investing in a training facility allows them to capture their potential. It's kind of a baseline investment that has to be made.
So Michele, you came into a situation, or you stepped up in a situation that I think was unprecedented. You stood really tall and you set a new bar as far as valuations at the time in the NWSL. So what was behind your thinking?
Yeah, so if somebody asked me even 5 years ago whether I would be sitting here owning a sports team, let alone getting through all the drama that I went through, I would have said you're sadly mistaken. Quite frankly, to be totally honest, until 2019, I didn't even know there was a professional women's league. I got to know about that because of the World Cup. The women's national team won the World Cup, and there was a reception in the Capitol Hill. I live in D.C., so I was invited. So I joined the team to be I was asked to be a role model, and so I was happy to do that. And then, of course, I think most of you probably are familiar with the journey that I had to take to sit here. And once I understood what was happening, of course, it was unacceptable and outrageous. And I don't think, let alone sports player, no one should be subject to the kind of environment they were put through. And somebody had to step up and help them. It probably was not something that I anticipated, I wanted to do, but once you're in it, it was not even a hard decision. I wasn't even thinking about or calculating, should I do it, should I not do it? It's something you had to do because you had to fix the situation. And especially as an immigrant who came to this country, and I can say I'm sort of like you're looking at an American dream, so I'm very grateful for what I was able to accomplish in this country. So I do feel that I have something to give back, and I don't want anyone to have to go through the kind of things, extra mile, the extra effort that you have to put in. At the end of the day, American dream, in my opinion, is about equal playing field. Everyone, regardless of sex, gender, profession, that you're given an equal opportunity for success. Not equal outcome, but equal opportunity to pursue. And when I was understanding what was going on, that's exactly what I wanted to do, and that's what I do in my business for other sort of underprivileged and under-resourced group. And this was about making sure that people who are in a position to provide that kind of environment to give an equal playing field to pursue, and if they fail, they have no one else to blame. But that's really about this was about that, not about me, inconvenience. I didn't even have LinkedIn profile. I was a very private person. And all of a sudden, looking at your name on whatever social media and everything else was just surreal. But I kind of learned how to deal with it.
It's interesting. You touch on the role of the owner, right? And what do each of you see as your role as the owner or an owner, in some cases, in the teams that you're involved in? Angie, would you like to take a first shot?
Shouldn't we go to the most experienced owners first? No, I mean, I think our role is to lead our organization into the most success that it can have on and off the field. And I think the way that lots of owners approach that in different ways. For myself and for Chris, we see our role as putting together the best team to lead the organization. So hiring excellent people to grow the organization, doing everything that is within our control to set up our players for success, to set up our front office for success, to set up our community for success, to create an experience that our fans want to be a part of.
The thing I would start with, and not to be trying to be controversial, I don't like the word owner. I don't. A lot of you know me in here. I don't think I've ever used the word owner as it relates to sports teams. I think we are somewhere between investors and caretakers, kind of like a lame word, but we're effectively there to help grow what the franchise is doing, both on the pitch, court, field, et cetera, and most relevantly in the community. These are not normal businesses. These are community businesses, and I think people who get into sports sometimes don't quite realize that. They certainly do once they get in pretty quickly. But they're so powerful in the communities, and that's one of the great things that I love about sports is seeing the effect that it has on the community more broadly. You know, whether it's in the stadium, whether it's with charitable work, whether it's with things that players and executives can do. I have some folks that I've worked with over the years at various teams, and they can created amazing programs. We're still doing the 76 hours, aren't we? So I think we're doing that out of Philadelphia in terms of charitable work. But again, to me, it's about providing the resources, the environment, and the type of management team that can really grow these businesses, but with a real focus on where we operate from a community perspective.
And how do you balance then your obligation, or the impact you can have on the community with some of the, financial realities and expectations?
It's really hard. And by definition, as we all know, you're never making everybody happy, right? So you start with sort of accepting that, and maybe like losing your Twitter feeds or, whatever else can be, incredibly toxic out there as well. But the reality is you just do your best. You hire amazing people that have the right value systems in terms of what they're trying to achieve. And it's like anything, like you can't ask players have such an unbelievable effect in their communities, but you can't say you need to go out and do community work every day, right? Just to take like an extreme example, they often want to do more than they even can, just given the limits on their time and travel and things of that nature. And then like anything else, there's some that you have to push to do things. I've found from an organizational standpoint, our people have always wanted to do more. And then you just get into the question you asked, which is, there's always a balance, like anything, between we are running businesses, and at the same time, we know how powerful they are and what they can do, to our communities. So it's a balance.
Michele, were you going to say something?
Yeah, so I don't think it's any different than running any other business. I think that the leaders, whether it's owner or hire, CEO, whatnot, the leader's role is to set the vision and create an infrastructure that's conducive for success, anyone who comes into the organization, and hire the best people to succeed. So in this case, the vision, in large part, it's about winning, I have to confess. So there's a vision, and then you create all the right processes, incentive, you invest in a training facility. Why should female players practice in suboptimal conditions where male players get to have all the gadgets and all the most advanced programs and technology and so forth? So we provide the best technology and programs and put together the best roster, put together the best coaching staff, front office staff, and it's really not that complicated. Now, the sports and especially women's soccer right now is a lot more complex than, with all due respect to McDonald's selling hamburgers. So there's a lot more complexities that we should be aware of, but I think that's what leaders are supposed to do, to make sure that those barriers are, by and large, invisible to the players and the coaching staff and front office, and their job is to really be the best and fulfill the vision.
So let's change gears a little bit. David, you mentioned institutional money, and Angie, I'm going to throw it to you. And we see institutional money coming into, I guess, except for the NFL, all of the leagues, and coming in a pretty big way. Your thoughts on institutional money coming into ownership, and is there a place for institutional? How would you feel as an owner about partnering with institutional money?
I think it depends. I think it depends on what they bring financially, what they bring to making the business better. I think it depends a lot on incentive alignment, right? And time frame. I think all these things matter. If you own a franchise that is a multi-generational part, long-term thing that doesn't necessarily have to have a terminal end, how do you reconcile that with an institutional investor who may have a different time frame? And so I think if you can be value aligned, mission aligned, pursuing the same goals, and at an appropriate valuation, I think it could be great.
So David, like Angie, your day job, you're no stranger to institutional investors. What would be your take on that question?
Well, it's fun because I get lots of calls from institutional investors these days saying, what do you think about investing in sports, and how do you see that landscape both today and in the future? But first, I'll shout out. I don't know if they're here. I think Jordan might be here. But so we've worked with Arctos as our partner in a variety of situations, and I view them as very clearly an institutional investor. So they're a good example, and they've been fantastic partners. But I agree that you have to have the alignment set. From the standpoint of what are your goals, what are you trying to achieve, what are the time frames. And that's something, obviously, the leagues are spending a lot of time thinking about, particularly around the governance type structures and timeframes of funds and things of that nature and information flow. And I think the leagues have analyzed it very, very clearly. But I think it's a living, breathing dynamic, meaning I think leagues will, some leagues that haven't looked at it will certainly be looking at it in the future. Others may be changing the rules a little bit as they see institutional capital and advancing in the sector and playing out. But at the end of the day, first off, these are, from an investment standpoint, these are businesses that are quite, they're not correlated to the broader markets, right? And we all see what's going on in markets right now and at different points in time. And I don't think the sports ecosystem is really
Unless
correlated.
You're building a stadium.
What's that?
Unless you're building a stadium.
That's construction costs. But in terms of the valuations of the franchises, et cetera, the second thing is we all talk a lot about franchises and leagues, but actually what I look at as a sports media and entertainment ecosystem is much broader than the 5 major U.S. leagues and the European and global football pyramids and things of that nature. If you think about the connectivity back to we're media and content businesses. And then you layer on all the things that are happening in technology and with fan engagement and the different way we're consuming the media, et cetera, and how, again, sports is such a part of really, you can't say everyone, but I'd say most people's lives. It's just, sort of amazing. So you have non-correlated asset class, in my view. You have, I've never met anybody personally, I'm sure they exist, who's invested in sports and regretted it. So again, I go back to, there's a fun and a fan factor. I'm sure they exist. I don't know them, luckily. But the reality is, we all look for things that are fundamentally growing, right? When we're talking about putting on our investment hats. These are businesses and ecosystems that are all growing. Different levels of maturity. Some are growing faster, slower. Some have more international growth. Some have just catch up to do, like we've been talking about a little bit between, men's and women's, et cetera. But fundamentally, we're all growing. So we're all growing, and we have that non-correlation factor. And the reality at the end of the day is, back to my very first point, you now are seeing private equity firms investing in this ecosystem. It's not just the, sort of more specialized firm in kind of sports or sports media and entertainment. And that was really interesting to me because I always go back to, like, what memo am I writing that I'm presenting to my investment committee to invest, in one of these businesses, et cetera. And so, again, it depends. It's a little different to me still between teams and then, again, more broadly into the ecosystem where there's tons of businesses that are involved in everything that folks in this room and that we all and our teams are engaged with. So anytime I see an industry that has very clear long-term growth, that's a place that you at least want to be looking at. And then the last piece I would say institutionally was the acceptance, particularly from a league perspective, which is very clear that it has been accepted. And then it's a matter of the funds themselves are getting capital from pension funds, wealth funds, high net worth individuals, et cetera. And as they think about their portfolios, because I get a lot of these phone calls, they look at it as a diversification relative to their other asset classes. And that's a huge benefit, is that you have something that's non-correlated to their equity portfolios or their credit portfolios or things of that nature. So again, and I think these funds will perform quite well and these investments will perform quite well. And that'll lead to more and more institutional capital coming into the space.
So I don't know a whole lot about investor community and big money and so forth, but I do want to say that one of the many reasons why I did what I did is to hopefully see a lot of successful women come into investing in sports. Because if you look at kind of the world who owns sports teams, a lot of very successful male entrepreneurs, or when they sell their company or they make a lot of money, one of the first things that they do is go buy a big sports teams, right? New York Giants, I don't know, Dallas Mavericks. So there are a lot of rich, very successful women out there. Why are they not coming in? And just because men are doing it, women should not be doing it. But they're equal, a lot of women should come in more and invest in sports. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of went through what I went through, because I want more women to see that, okay, we can do this. We can come in. There are diversity in terms of not by necessarily gender or race, but yeah, we need to bring some different perspectives. I mean, even in the financial community, when you talk about the venture and private equity, there a lot talk about gender inequity. How many partners are female versus male, and how many percentages are male the decision makers in this world. I actually did count sitting up here how many women are sitting down here, and there are 11. There are women standing as well, but women who are sitting down, I think I'm pretty close to 11 out of whatever percentages. So why aren't women interested in investing women's sports, or for that matter, any sports? I know there are some female owners through family affiliations and whatnot, or they may have bought it, but I would like to encourage a lot more successful women to come in and invest in sports in general, not necessarily women's sports, but sports.
Absolutely. I want to change gears a little bit. Angie, David mentioned that you all are in the media and content business. And is that how you see it? Is that how you see, or was that a driving force behind your investment in the Kansas City Current?
Okay, good question, because I didn't see it. I honestly didn't even think about it. But luckily, now I'm learning about it, and it's a huge tailwind. I think what's fascinating to me is so many of the reasons why I saw the investment as a good one were really basic, really. We thought if we had a good product in a good environment, we could sell tickets and sponsorships and merchandise. And that's less than half the future revenue stream of what's going on here. And so what is interesting, I think we've all been talking about valuations and why have valuations in sports grown, because everything about it has changed. And I mean, it has been a moving target, moving in the right direction of significant additional potential future revenue streams. And I think that's really exciting. I think it's exciting from my seat as an owner of a women's team too, because so many of these tailwinds that are just revenue stream in sports also, I think, are big revenue streams in sports who haven't had the ability to control any of that in the past. When content was driven by the very few minority, when you could only watch what was on TV, when there was no social media, when there was no streaming, when there was no investment even in your athletes. I mean, all of these things are allowing us to level up, both in who can watch us, how they can watch it. And I mean, I really only thought about it from a more traditional, even facilities perspective of who wants to go watch a women's game in a high school stadium where there's no environment. It's not that people don't want to watch women athletes. Look at Lindsay, right? Like, who's more amazing and been more inspirational to watch? Yes, you. Amazing. And so we know it's not women athletes that's been the issue, but it has been, how can you watch them? How can you know about them? How can you see them? And all of these tailwinds are happening at the same time. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity that is expanding. For sure, it's expanding sports everywhere. But for the kind of disproportionate ones that hadn't had any investment in them at all, that ceiling is lifting even higher.
So I think absolutely we're in the digital content business, but the other side is actually live events become sort of this significant portion of the digital content. So we have to have the expertise about live events that include not only the best players, the best games, but the fan engagement, community engagement, and so forth. So I don't think we can focus only on digital media if we don't know how to do live events. I was just in France, and I met with some of the French football teams and folks, and they told me that in France, culturally, people just don't like to going to live events, especially sports events, even for men. So live events, very hard to get fans to come out to a stadium to watch. So as a result, other than one or two teams, they get 1,000, 2,000 fans to the stadium. So if you do that, digital content does not become as compelling as if you have 10, 20, 30,000 people showing up. So I do believe that we're in both live events and digital content business, and they have to kind of work very well together to kind of reinforce each other.
So David, the NWSL doesn't have a regional media revenue stream they're trying to protect, really, right? It's pretty new, digitally focused, but you're invested in some teams that have relied for a long time on regional media, the value of those rights, and the media landscape is changing so drastically. How do you see, from an owner's perspective, how do you look at those changes, and how do you think about that impact on your teams?
Well, look, I think I start with, I'm pretty basic sort of person and investor. So I look at the media rights, both at a league level and a team level. And by the way, the NWSL will have those media rights. That's like a high-class tailwind in the equation. But look, the RSNs are obviously going through a rough period of time for very simple reasons that we all know. Less people are watching cable TV and satellite, and they're cutting cords and consuming media in different ways and using their time to consume media in completely different formats. But think about it. The RSNs didn't exist. I forget how many years ago, Scott, you would know, when the RSNs didn't exist until they did. And then, we didn't have Netflix. I mean, how many people had a Netflix subscription, 7 years ago? I don't remember exactly when it started. But by the way, you only had this iPhone starting in 2007, which, again, isn't that long ago. We didn't have these. And so the media rights themselves, in my view, absolutely going to continue to grow and will be worth more in 3 years. They'll be worth more in 5 years, et cetera, et cetera. How they get split up and what the distribution mechanism is, that is to be determined. I mean, we're all living it, watching it. We're seeing the different streaming services start to get involved in sports in different ways, in different trials. There is always, in my opinion, going to still be a linear, level of sports rights and distribution that makes sense. There will be an asymptote in number of subscribers at some point in time, and then, values will be less at that point in time than they were 3 years ago. But then you have all these other avenues, and you've got your digital rights, and obviously you've got national rights and broadcast and things of that nature. So to me, none of us really know exactly how all of that will play out in terms of the consumption patterns and distribution patterns completely, but we're all seeing it in real time, and we're seeing the changes, but the absolute value of those rights are going to continue to grow. It's going to be different people in some cases paying for them and securing them for different methods of distribution.
Just want to remind the audience, if you have questions, we have a microphone here in the middle, and please just step up and we'll get to you over these last 10 minutes. David, I want to come back to the point that I don't think any of us would dispute, that women athletes definitely are not the issue, and they're very compelling, and people want to see them participate. You invested recently in Athletes Unlimited. You're rumored to, or there's discussion that you're towards the top of the list, if not at the top of the list, for an NWSL team in Utah. Is there a hypothesis that you have about women's sports, or do these just happen to be two standalone opportunities that for different reasons might be interesting to you?
Well, I think both Angie and Michele, I think, spoke earlier about the growth, fundamental growth. There's lots of different reasons why people will invest in a sports franchise. But again, going back to the investment side of the equation, the reality is the growth that a variety of different women's sports has is tremendous. And, you talk a little bit about like the U.S. women's soccer team, right? And that got you interested in some ways. And I mean, watching the women's World Cup team, we'll say it again, shout out Lindsay. I mean, watching Lindsay out there competing at the absolute highest level of all, being the greatest in the world at something, that's compelling to watch over and over again, frankly. I used to try to figure out how I could watch Lindsay's races more, right? It was hard to get coverage. By the way, that's another business idea. Figure out where everything is actually on these days, because I find it impossible, actually, sometimes to know where something is being distributed or how it's being distributed. But put that all aside, I think there's even more growth in women's sports in many ways and in many areas. Again, every sport's different, et cetera. But and as people, because the athletes and the experience is incredible, both as it relates to watching, and again, Michele made a very good point on live events. There is still nothing like a live sporting event, in my opinion. And I think fans have shown that. I think as we went through COVID, I mean, people were just so much wanted to get back into a stadium, an arena, et cetera. But the reality for women is they need to be seen more. Okay? So they need better places to play, and they need more distribution as it relates to their rights. And as I always say for a variety of things, and I say this about a couple of different women's sports, once you go, you're like, wow, this is incredible. I'll go again and again. So it's about getting that first time viewing, in my opinion, in a lot of cases, and it will just continue to take off from there. So I just think the runway is huge.
So I want to say, even though you didn't ask me, I will say it. Since we're talking to all the financial folks, if many of you didn't invest early on Amazon, Google, you name it, Facebook, including going back even further, AOL, because as finance person, you could not justify even then valuation, and this business model doesn't work. And they've been going at, if you were talking about stock prices for 10, 15 years like this, and at some point it went up like a hockey stick. Women's sport, women's soccer is right there, so don't miss out on this one this time.
That's true. Angie, you have in common, you all three have in common, but you have a huge day job. And I'm curious now, this moonlighting job as owner of the Kansas City Current has to be incredibly difficult. How do you manage the two full-time jobs, if in fact they're two full-time jobs? How do you manage it? How do you think about that balance?
Hiring really good people. I'm going to say that setting the vision, the culture, the leadership of the Kansas City Current is really my job with that organization. I'm not the president. I'm not the general manager. We have two unbelievable people who sit in those roles, and they are driving the day-to-day business of that. So, I mean, my actual real day job is the chief investment officer of Palmer Square. Obviously, there's a lot of joy and passion that comes with our involvement in the Kansas City Current, but the daily executor is not my role in that organization.
David, I'd ask you the same question. Blackstone's not a small place. TAC Ops is not a small global opportunity to lead. You might have more sports investments than anybody on the planet. You've got a full family. Everybody says you're terrific at all of these things. How do you think about it, and how do you do it?
But I'd start with, I'd say I think my office spends more time dealing with tickets than like anything else. It's preposterous, actually. But I'd start with what Angie said, right, at the top, right? And Michele, you said earlier, too, in terms of, like other businesses that you've run and started and been in charge of, like, it's about hiring amazing people. Yes, we have jobs as it relates to setting, culture and setting up processes and setting up risk parameters and setting up things of that nature, but you fundamentally hire awesome people and let them do their jobs. So that would be point one. B is I just sleep a whole lot less, and I really try to keep my day job to my day job, and generally speaking, try to push everything to do with the sort of sports media and entertainment world to, evening hours and weekend hours, and you can combine them. As many people in this room know, my response to a lot of requests for a meeting or to talk about this or that, both third parties and with our management teams, is meet me at the game. So there's time going to a game, there's time at the game, there's halftime, there's period breaks, there's post game. So once that becomes part of your culture, and then back to me being a massive fan, I love going to the games. I will go to as many games as I possibly can across all of sports, to be honest with you, not just ones that I'm involved in. And so bringing the business to those events, like you just kill kind of two birds with one stone. So just make it happen.
Michele, is there an owner in another sport or in your league who you look to and you either try to emulate or you try to take a lot from because you think they're getting so much right or they've gotten so much right?
So I don't really know that much. I'm new, right? I took over the team on March 28th. So I've been like my head's down, like looking at our team and how to fix this and so forth. So I haven't been out much yet, but I spent a lot of time because I was trying to figure out where do I go learn how to run the best team. And right now in the soccer world, Premier League is doing pretty well. So I spent a lot of time in London trying to figure out how they train their players, what's their training facility look like. With all due respect, I don't want to build just the best NWSL training center. I want to build the best soccer training center, period, right? So I thought Premier League probably has the best. I went and looked at Premier League. I went to look at some of the French and Dutch and so forth. So I'm in the process of learning. So I don't know whether it's necessarily one person, but certain teams are doing a lot of things right. So I think I'll get to learn more about those teams. But I think at the end of the day, we're in the business of producing this product, which is soccer. And at the end of the day, we have to make the best product possible, because we're not at NWSL, even for that matter, Spirit, we're not competing against DC United or men's soccer team. We are competing with very limited number of discretionary hours that our fans have. Everyone has only so many hours a day, and they can spend that time not only watching men's soccer or men's basketball, but they can go out, see a movie, they can go out, have dinner. So what's the compelling reason other than we want to support women's sports? What's the compelling reason to spend their 3-4 hours a weekend to come and watch our game? That means who is spending most of the time to really invest in building the best product? It's not any different, in my opinion, in other businesses as well. So I'm trying to learn a lot of teams, not only in the U.S., but overseas, where the best kind of investment philosophy, training programs, and the stadium fan experience and all that. So it's been pretty eye-opening experience. I have to say Tottenham has the best stadium and best training facility. I'm so impressed. I just watched the New York Giants and Green Bay Packers game at the stadium. They have multi-layer actually field, so they don't have to play on the same field. They can kind of roll out the soccer field, and then underneath is the football field.
I totally agree with you, but it's also the newest.
That's
It's beautiful.
Yes, it's absolutely fabulous. And their training facility is also the best I've seen so far.
So Angie, a little bit different, if not other owners you might look to. Is there a player that's come through Kansas City in your short time that you feel like their performance, maybe off the field, has transcended what they've done for the organization on the field, and it's sort of part of why you got into the business?
That's a really hard question. We have a lot of players that have, I would say, given myself personally, the rest of the organization, the rest of the city, just a ton of joy this year, and how they have handled themselves on the field, where we were last year. I mean, really, really last year. And we're playing the semifinals this weekend. So that whole squad has come together in an unbelievable way. But then off the pitch, you talk about the limitations of what a player can do within the community, and our players are all so motivated. I mean, part of the joy of the game, if people love to come to our games, our players will sign autographs for an hour and a half. They will sign autographs until nobody wants one anymore. They stay to the end of the game, and what they have given back to our community, I can't single out one, but I can wholeheartedly single out our team as having been amazing.
It's like asking who's your favorite child. Come on.
Depends on the day.
I suppose. David, I've got a few seconds, and this one is a little bit personal for me, and with all due respect, Michele, to Spurs, and David knows this, my favorite team is Palace, and I like them because it's authentic, it's gritty, it's not the shiniest, and so I was wondering,
the training facility is incredible. We got to get you there.
But I was wondering, when you were in on the bidding for Chelsea earlier in the year, I thought to myself, like, I could never change my allegiance like that from one Premier League team to another. And so and I'm going to use the word owner because I don't have, as an owner, how does that calculus go through your mind as you're thinking about perhaps becoming involved in Chelsea, which would obviously cause you to divest your interest in Palace? And is that a strain? How does that factor for you?
Good news is we're out of time. And there have been a few other situations that if we had more time, I would not answer as well. But I will give a quick answer in that, look, at the end of the day, first off, there's a group of 4 of us that sort of jointly are invested in Crystal Palace. And frankly, my partner, Steve Parrish, runs that team day to day. He is the chairman of the team. He is the CEO of the team. He is the face of the team. He grew up a couple blocks from the stadium. He lives in London. It's a little bit different when you're sort of those American investors that are like 3,500 miles away. And at the end of the day, I love Crystal Palace. Those of you who know me well know how much I love Crystal Palace. But there are a handful of teams / brands out there on a global basis that Chelsea is one of them, and the opportunity to invest in that particular situation with a very small number of people, frankly, looking at it, just given it was a very complicated situation, to say the least, and that potential opportunity, we were comfortable giving that our best shot. And yes, we would have had to have divested of the interest in the investment in Crystal Palace had that come through. And I would have just been, if that had happened, it would have been a really sad day in one sense. But again, back to the investment part, it would have been a really interesting investment from another sense in terms of what's out there for, for Chelsea. And then you would have probably had to hide a little bit when you went to London. Since they're both there.
I think we're out of time. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to everybody.